The Vancouver Canucks might be making a fatal mistake. A season of inconsistency so far has found the Canucks in the second wildcard spot in the West and only a point shy of being out of it. And with just 2 wins over the last 10 games, things are starting to reach a boiling point in Vancouver, which could lead to a massive trade of JT Miller or Elias Pettersson. But what's gone wrong for the Canucks? How has it gotten to this point with the Miller and Pettersson relationship, and who is more likely to be dealt by Vancouver? Let's talk about it today and break down all the Vancouver trade rumors right here, right now, presented by BetUS. Now, it's interesting seeing this story rear its ugly head again, because I feel like we've heard for a while now that Pettersson and JT Miller don't exactly have the greatest relationship in the world. But it feels like over the last couple of months, things have really turned to a head, and we've heard a lot about how Pettersson and JT Miller just are not working it whatsoever. And it's not just the rift that's affecting both of them, but it seems to be affecting the rest of the Canucks organization up to this point. Of course, we had JT Miller having a leave of absence earlier on in the season, and of course, with Pettersson's struggles so far this year, it's been a weird culmination of just a lot of different things that has led the Canucks to be in this spot. Considering JT Miller left the team earlier for personal reasons, we had Elias Pettersson also having struggles to start out this year. It's been a tough situation for Vancouver to navigate, and it's tough because it might end up leading to a trade in the end. And it really is unfortunate because having both of these guys on Vancouver has been a big benefit for the Canucks for a long time now, but it just seems like they are just not able to make this relationship work, and it seems like a big problem in that locker room. But you can see what Pettersson has been able to do for Vancouver when he's been at his best, 102 points in 80 games back in 2023. You look at JT Miller, what he's been able to do last season, getting 103 points, 37 goals. Both of these guys have had unbelievable numbers in Vancouver, which just makes it even more sad that it doesn't look like they're going to stick around. Now, the thing is, if Vancouver was having a lot more success on the ice, I don't think we would be hearing about this as much, especially when you consider in the past how it seems like Pettersson and Miller have been able to make things work just because of some of the team's success. But this year, it seems like it's a different story. And we, of course, know the history of Jim Rutherford and the teams that he manages over. It seems like Vancouver could be another team in line to make a big blockbuster deal. I mean, moving either of these two players would be absolutely massive, but it seems like an inevitability at this point. Now, it seems like out of the two players here, JT Miller is getting more initial interest, or at least trade offers from other teams. It was interesting because we had this article by The Athletic kind of detailing some of it. Now, it's interesting because we saw Josh Yohe report the Canucks fielded and walked away from an offer with the Rangers involving Mika Zibanejad. Reportedly, it was a 1-for-1 deal, but the Canucks also wanted to get Brayden Schneider, as Elliot Freeman mentions, which I think is pretty likely. I mean, I don't think the Canucks would ever possibly accept a Zibanejad for Miller deal, at least with what Mika Zibanejad's game is right now. I just don't think that's possible. So the fact that the Canucks ended up asking for more makes a lot more sense to me, but it's interesting because it probably would have been maybe Zibanejad and Schneider for JT Miller, but the Rangers said no to that type of deal. So gauging Miller's interest out there is going to get fascinating. I don't know how many teams out there are going to be interested in Miller, even with that production, because I think there might be some teams turned off by the fact that he seems to have walked out on a bunch of NHL teams already and seems to have a pretty hefty expiration date. At least when it comes to that locker room, it seems like people either love him or people absolutely despise him, and it seems like that has happened again in Vancouver, specifically with Elias Pettersson. So for a lot of teams out there, I'm not sure how much they want to shake up that locker room in that way. He could benefit you, especially short term, but with that long-term contract still being a major factor, that I think could take some teams away. You also got to consider that contract too when we look at it with the cap hit and also the trade protection. He has a full no-move clause for this year, the next, and the next after that, making $8 million. So he's going to be a difficult contract to trade no matter how you slice it. And that to me is the most interesting part, because we've heard JT Miller come out already and say how him and his family want to stay in Vancouver, but it seems like if this situation continues to boil over, he might be forced to accept a trade no matter what. And unfortunately for the Canucks, it's not even a situation where they can wait until the offseason and that no-move clause protection changes for them to potentially make a deal. It's for the next 2 seasons. So you're going to have to make a situation work where Miller wants to go to the team involved. And again, when we're talking about limiting the options, the cap hit, the lightning rod locker room presence, and also that trade protection, it just makes it so much more impossible for the Canucks to move him. Now, at least for Vancouver, we have heard interest from other teams, again, like the New York Rangers, who make a lot of sense as a Miller fit, even though I personally want to do it because of how it ended last time, and I don't know if it'll really change much for that team. But in terms of what they need going forward, I could see them really liking a player like Miller who brings a lot of intensity in really all situations. But I think you're only going to really see a handful of teams that, one, want to trade for Miller and also can trade for Miller. It is a tough deal to get rid of, and I think that's why we haven't seen a Miller trade yet. Now, the one difference and one advantage I think Vancouver has here is their cap space. They have about $6.9 million to work with. So if they need to bring on a player that makes maybe $1 million more than JT Miller, Miller, it wouldn't be the end of the world for them. It would still have cap implications in the future, but for right now, it would end up fitting, which I think for them is all that they can really do. I mean, in Miller's case, it is a big contract and they need to do the most they can to get rid of it. My big question mark in just this whole situation, though, is why did both of these players sign the contracts they did? I mean, in Pettersson's case, I think it makes a lot more sense for him to stay in Vancouver considering how he's done there, how he is the franchise face, but especially in JT Miller's case. I mean, this contract isn't, of course, coming from this month or anything. It was a couple of years ago, but I feel like if you had a problem with Pettersson, those issues would have been coming up when he signed the deal. So I just don't really understand in Miller's case, if it was something that would later lead to so much controversy and drama, why he would choose to stay with the Canucks in the first place, especially with that long term of a deal. Maybe he was riding high with some of the success and how well he had been doing, but I just feel like if it was a situation that resulted in a trade anyways, signing the long-term contracts that they did just doesn't really make sense to me. Now, just gauging Pettersson and Miller's personalities and how they are around the ice, I think it is pretty obvious that it is a lot of a personality issue. In Pettersson's case, I think he's a lot more of a quiet guy, a lot more of a reserved person, whereas JT Miller, I think, is the exact opposite. If he's on a team, he's going to give him 110%, and he's going to be aggravating everybody possible to be better, which has its advantages and disadvantages. In a case of Pettersson, I think he could have maybe got rubbed the wrong way from that. And in Miller's case, seeing how quiet and reserved Pettersson is could maybe aggravate him as well. So it's kind of this weird loop and cycle where these two personalities just don't really seem to clash. And of course, a trade coming from it is not really all that surprising. I think for a lot of us, we talk about, of course, the on-ice stats and how they play and what actually happens on the ice. But I think for a lot of teams out there, and when we see trades and players leaving, a lot of it can be due to locker room issues. I mean, you have a player like Pierre-Luc Dubois, who I absolutely could see being in that type of group where those locker room issues and just not being a fit with other players results in deals being made. And I think in this case, it's exactly what's happening here. If the Canucks were just going by on-ice stats and what they've been doing, then sure, you'd love to keep both of these guys, but it just doesn't seem possible with the chemistry and the fit there and how much of a rift it's causing. But here's the thing to me is that, of course, with the rift of both Pettersson and Miller, we've heard a lot of trade rumors for both of these guys. And even though I think we've heard a little bit more with Miller, we've also heard a lot about Elias Pettersson. And I'm just going to come out here and say that I think trading Pettersson would be a massive, fundamental mistake by this Canucks team. Now, here's the thing. If you prefer JT Miller, I absolutely can see why with that fire there. But I think Pettersson, even when he's at his worst, which is right now, the defense, I think, is miles better than what JT Miller is able to provide. The awareness there and the adaptability. Even if Pettersson's game-breaking talent isn't always on display, I think he's still doing a lot of the right things with Vancouver that end up leading to good things in the end. Even though he hasn't been putting up the great production, I still think Pettersson is an elite player. In JT Miller's case, I think he has a lot more holes and obvious ones throughout the game that kind of leave me wanting more, even if his best moments are sometimes even better than Pettersson's. Now, here's the thing. The only reason I could ever possibly see Vancouver trading Pettersson is if that offer is just so much better than what JT Miller would get, which I can kind of see. I mean, you can see what the Rangers are not even willing to give up Bo Zibanejad and Braden Schneider in a JT Miller deal. If Pettersson was offered in New York, they would be giving up Zibanejad, Schneider, they'd be giving up the whole team to try to get a player like Pettersson on their team. And I think that's why for Vancouver, they are still kind of seeing what's out there, fueling the offers, because I think they have to at this point. You have to open up your options. I would imagine in Pettersson's case, though, the offers are a lot more enticing. And that's really the only reason I could see Vancouver even attempting it. And I'll be the first to admit that Pettersson is not at his best right now, but I think he is who you ride with if you're going to keep one of these guys. He's younger and I think has the potential to be a more impactful player in all three zones than Miller can be. The sad part is I think both of these guys on the same team can be pretty great because I think they're two polar opposites in terms of play style and in terms of who they are. If they were able to make it work on the ice, you'd have two great players here, forwards that can bring different elements to the game. And we've seen for Vancouver that having some pretty big success in the past when both of them are at the top of their levels. But it just hasn't been the case. And I think that relationship being eroded is really a sad thing for Vancouver because they're forced to make a big trade here. We'll see what they end up getting back, but I think Miller is still the more likely guy to go just because for Vancouver, that longevity in Pettersson, I think should be more highly valued. I think for the Canucks, though, if we were to see a JT Miller trade, you'd pretty much be guaranteed to be getting at least a second line center back, or at least that should be the main priority for Vancouver. I think for the Canucks, it'll be hard to find that on the market, especially if it is a JT Miller deal, just because the teams are so tightened in the race there. But I think you have to do it, especially with a guy that can fill in for the role in the minutes behind Pettersson and make Pettersson's minutes a lot easier. You have to find somebody like that if you're going to trade Miller, because I don't think for Vancouver, a prospects and pick package is ever going to work. The sad thing is that we look at for a team like the Rangers, who has obvious interest in JT Miller. To me, a player like Philip Hedl would be perfect, but the health is just a major issue. It has always been an issue throughout his NHL career. He missed a bunch of games last year, got injured this last week, and you can just never depend on him to be an everyday player for you. And I think that's something that the Rangers are potentially looking at as another trade option as well in their forward group. But when he is healthy, I think it'd be a pretty underrated offensive player. I think for him, it'll be an interesting one if he would be able to fill a second line center role. But again, for the Canucks, it seems like a natural fit, a Miller for Hedl plus type of deal. But I just think because of that health, it keeps Vancouver away, which eliminates another option. And at this point with Miller's trade protection, it's hard to do that. Most of all, though, I just kind of feel bad for Canucks management at this point. It's a tough spot when the trade deadline is just a month away. We're seeing so many different rumors and so many different things out there. And the Canucks are in a spot where the trade market is pretty tough. It's pretty dense. And you might have to make a franchise-altering decision on a situation that they shouldn't really have to either. Miller and Pettersson should be able to get along enough to at least tolerate each other. But it seems like the boiling point is just too hot to ignore. And it's a tough one because I don't think there's really any deal, especially if you are to trade Pettersson, where the Canucks end up winning it. And even in a player like JT Miller, even though I have my reservations around him, he is still a very impactful player when he is at his best for the Canucks team, and offensively has been a critical part of the cogs of this team, of the whole ship. And I just think for Vancouver, especially with the trade protection, with his cap hit, I also don't really see them winning a JT Miller deal just because of just how many hurdles they have to jump through to even make a deal happen. So we'll have to wait and see, but trading Pettersson to me will be a massive mistake for the Canucks. They need to do everything possible to not let that happen and to keep Pettersson as happy as possible. And hey, in a potential Miller deal, you might get a center, you might even get a winger you could pair perfectly with Pettersson in the future. We'll have to wait and see what ends up happening there. But I think for the Canucks, trading JT Miller at this point seems to be the inevitability. And I think that is the right course for this Canucks roster. Now, when we look at teams that could actually trade for Miller, there's a few interesting options. The Rangers, of course, are among them. They're a team that does have a lot of center options in Zibanejad and Trocheck and Philip Hedl, of course. Trocheck, I think, is the guy that the Rangers would want to trade the least, even though I think that would be a perfect fit for Vancouver, but unfortunately, I just don't see it happening. Another team is Buffalo, but this really is dampened by the no move clause. I mean, JT Miller could easily not want to go to Buffalo, and that could just be it. But I think for both teams involved, a potential Cousins for JT Miller deal could be interesting. Though for the Sabres, I think they might want to stay away from somebody that is as defensively uninvolved as Miller is, but he could be exactly what could light the fire under them that they might need. You also have the New York Islanders, which I thought could be an interesting fit. Of course, and a player like Lou Lamoriello, and a person like Lou Lamoriello who loves his older presence, his veteran guys, I think a JT Miller could be perfect there. You could potentially have a Brock Nelson for JT Miller swap. Something like that could be interesting. Brock Nelson, of course, for a pending UFA, somebody that is on the trade block right now, potentially for this deadline. That could be an interesting second line center option behind Pettersson, who could really bring some good goal scoring there. But really, I'm just spitballing at this point. Any Miller trade would have to be extremely difficult to make, so we'll see what happens. But those are a few teams that I thought could be interesting, though the Sabres, especially with the no move clause, a little bit less likely. Now, before we go, I want to talk about today's sponsor in BetUS, the place make your hockey picks and sports picks all throughout the season, whether it's on the NHL, the NFL, the NBA. BetUS is the place to do so. You can go through all the live games, the over and unders, the money lines. You can go through different players, the Stanley Cup winners as well. So a lot of options over there. And as well, BetUS has a live casino with a bonus 200% sign-up bonus as well. So now is the time to get started, and thank you to BetUS for sponsoring today's video. That's going to be it for me today, folks. I hope you guys did enjoy just a little video while I'm still on vacation to get out to you guys. And I want to really talk about this Miller and Pettersson situation because it has been bugging me for a while. But I hope you guys did enjoy it. If you did, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit the notification bell. Comment down below your thoughts on the Miller and Pettersson drama. Who you would rather trade? What do you think could happen in a potential Miller or Pettersson deal? What the trade could look like? Let me know all your thoughts down below. Of course, make sure you share the video for all the hockey fans you guys know online, and click on this card for all my Trader content right on playlist. My name is Nathan. Have a fantastic hockey day, and goodbye.